in general, the cyber range offers hands-on experiential learning process. The students have to actually go and apply that learning in a real, hopefully realistic scenario and actually see it in action.
Welcome and thank you for listening in. I'm Becky Freemall, and this is Next Gen Cyber, the future of cybersecurity, a podcast of the U.S. Cyber Range, where we explore cutting edge trends, emerging technologies, and the future of cybersecurity careers, featuring thought leaders, researchers, and educators from across the field. Today, we are exploring the evolution of cyber range education and the critical difference between platforms and curriculum with someone who has been at the forefront of this field for decades. Dr. Joe Adams brings a unique perspective that spans military service, academia, and educational innovation. After retiring as a colonel from the U.S. Army Signal Corps, where he served as Chief Information Officer at the National Defense University, Joe created the Michigan Cyber Range, an internationally utilized platform that has influenced cybersecurity education across the country, as well as multiple European countries. Currently a faculty member in electrical and computer engineering at Virginia Tech, Joe holds a PhD in computer engineering from Virginia Tech, where his research focused on network security and trust-based access control. He's a senior member of IEEE, a member of ACM, and has a CISSP certification. His contributions to Cyberforce training earned him the Legion of Merit from the Michigan National Guard. And I can also tell you that Joe's experience building cyber range programs from the ground up, combined with his deep understanding of both military and academic needs, gives him unparalleled insight into what makes cybersecurity education truly effective. Joe, thank you so much for being here today.
Well, it's nice to be here.
And I do feel like I just maybe shared your resume. Apologize for the length, but you got a lot of stuff and I really wanted to share it all. But if you would just kind of introduce yourself, there might be some fun things that I missed. I don't know.
So along the way, I've built and used cyber ranges for education as an instructor at the U.S. Military Academy. I then, of course, got hired by Merit Network and the University of Michigan to build the Michigan Cyber Range. We did a lot of consulting with various states, various countries. Our focus, of course, at West Point was education, whereas in Michigan it was workforce development. And that's an important note, is that every time you see a cyber range, you need to ask the question, what is your purpose? Why? What is your mission? Because every cyber range is going to be different based on what it was built to deliver. And so that'll be a fun thing to talk about today.
Yes, I can't wait to hear more about that. And one of the things I wanted to talk was about the academia side, the curriculum development side of cyber ranges, and just find out from you, how do cyber ranges address the challenge of teaching that cutting edge cybersecurity concepts and fill that gap, maybe if you were, where traditional textbooks really just can't keep pace.
Right. Yeah. In general, the cyber range offers a hands-on experiential learning process. So think of it as a chemistry lab, a physics lab, part of a course where you've got an instructor who's going to talk a little bit about the theory, the purpose, why are we doing this? But then the students have to actually go and apply that learning in a real, hopefully realistic scenario and actually see it in action. The general the general means of teaching cybersecurity is to teach for defense. There are some certifications out there that are teaching offensive cybersecurity, but in academia, we focus on defensive. Teach you how to hack so that you learn how to defend against hackers. And so it almost becomes a two-step process where I teach you the theory, you do a lab that is offensive in nature. You're trying to break into something or crack a password or whatever. And then maybe the next day, maybe as a follow-on in the same lab, you work out how to secure, how to fix that vulnerability so that your organization is no longer vulnerable to that specific, type of attack. It's important to note that because, and stop me if I'm getting ahead, but it's important to note that because, a lot of times people tend to look at cyber ranges as teaching tools, and that's incorrect. It utilizes the tools to show and apply the theory that the student has learned. And so that's a very important distinction.
And maybe that's a kind of Venn diagram or kind of segues beautifully to a question I had just about experiential learning environments and how it helps faculty deliver that more, I guess you could say, sophisticated and current coursework.
Yeah, I mean, IT organizations are getting smaller by personnel, but larger by responsibility. So it is important that a student, before they go out into the workforce, before they start designing information systems, have an understanding for how things fit together and where the problems might be. This is the way to do it in a safe space. Cyber ranges tend to share characteristics in that they're isolated in some way from, the rest of the world. They are, uh, you know, resettable. So I can create a scenario for a lab. The student goes through the lab. They can pause at certain points. They can back up and try something again. But those are important points that it's safe. As we used to say at West Point, that's the last way you want to meet the dean is when one of your students gets off the reservation and starts causing problems in the production network. So you want to have that nice and isolated. However you do it, there are various ways, but you also need to be able to go back and say, all right, well, that's one way to do it. Now try this other way, um, and repeat those kind of things. And you want to be able to reset the lessons quickly, because if it's too labor intensive, then the instructor will do nothing but reset labs. So there are various techniques there to make that easier.
That makes me think too of when you talk about security. One of the things with the U.S. Cyber Range of Virginia Tech specifically is that they say, it was built by educators for educators. So not only, you just mentioned that's not the way you want to meet the dean is when a student strays off the reservation or off the land, you want the safe land that you want them to be in, but also to say, hey, by the way, we understand education, higher ed, K through 12, whatever it might be, the need to keep the student themselves safe, like their information. And I know that there's a lot of concern sometimes, I shouldn't say there's a lot, but in higher ed to make sure that their students are safeguarded as well and that their information doesn't get out there.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, the part of that isolation is removing any links to any kind of personal information, any kind of FERPA information. And that I mean that's a given. Uh, there are, for example, in the U.S. Cyber Range, there are links to learning management systems that help the instructor because they can pull down the grades, the progress reports, whatever. Um, and so that's the limit of it, right? But we know where it starts and where it ends, so we're keeping everything safe in between. Um, the real thing with places that are academic focused, education focused, is especially in the case of the Virginia/US Cyber Range, uh, it has standards that it can map its curriculum to. And so that is another mechanism uh, for an educator to be able to say, my students are learning A through D because I have been able to map the requirements provided by the NSA, provided by the state, provided by whoever, whatever governing body, to my curriculum. And by doing Lab 3, Step 4, they are meeting the criteria set forth in criteria B of whatever standard we're talking about.
Yeah, and I want to let the listeners know this too. You know, you had mentioned the Virginia Cyber Range, and just to back it up a little bit, the Virginia Cyber Range was a state funded, still is a state funded platform for state funded universities and K through 12 to use. And we found so much success in that and the desire from others to say, hey, how can we get in on this? But just because it was state funded, you know, the state, or I should say the Commonwealth, would not be thrilled with us, nor could we give it to others. And that was really the birth of the US Cyber Range, was to be able to
That,
extend this to others.
exactly, exactly. And like you said in my intro, I've worked with over half the states in the US who showed interest in creating a cyber range. The challenge there is cyber range is more than just a collection of equipment. It's the content. And that's where the US Cyber Range has really excelled, is that they've been able to develop quality content, maintain that, and maintain the link between the content and the standards so that it is transportable. It you know, people in other places can make use of it and be assured of what it's teaching. Whether, it's nice workforce development or it's NSA standards or it's whatever.
You know, we talked to students during the path of this podcast, if you will, and past podcast, and one student, you know, shared with us how he so enjoyed his class because he had had so many lecture only classes where he just saw students doing other things, they kind of glaze over. And he talked about how this really engaged students, not just for workforce development, but also to really take that theory and move it into practice. And I thought that was really interesting. And then one of our other podcast guests from a university, a community college, I believe, actually in northern Georgia, had shared how he was in the break room one day, or I guess in higher ed, we wouldn't call it a break room, a cafeteria. And, you know, students were walking up to him and said, we heard about the cyber range and we can't wait to take your class, you know, next semester. And I think that's something that's really important. And you and I talked about like that kind of yin and yang between theory and experiential learning, how they really can live together. And I would say develop more engaging curriculum for students.
Well, exactly. I mean, and you kind of touched on this earlier. Cybersecurity is a very rapidly evolving field, and books cannot be written, published quick enough to keep up. And so the instructors, as an instructor, when I taught this, it was okay, here's 10 minutes of me explaining the concept of whatever today's topic is, and I'm going to draw from a variety of training manuals and personal experience and blogs and things like that, but then you're going to go do the lab. And that's, you know listening to me sets the stage, and then doing the lab, you're actually in there implementing. Because, I mean, when I started teaching, cybersecurity would have been 2008, and that those operating systems, those tools, they have aged out of the inventory, hopefully. A lot of them haven't, but there you go. But now, here in 2025, you have new operating systems, you have new tools. So the stage keeps changing, and the curriculum needs to keep up. And if it gets static, like in a textbook, then you're just too far behind to be relevant.
Right. And talk about too, I think consistency in anything, whether you're in business, corporate, nonprofit, in this case, education, consistency is kind of everything. And when you move forward with something like a cyber range or any kind of experiential platform in the higher ed space, how does it help ensure that consistent learning outcomes across all the different sections and semesters that different university or different courses and sections are teaching?
So a cybersecurity course in my opinion, should be a culminating course, right? So before walking into my classroom, students should have a background in operating systems, in networking, uh, hardware, or computer architecture, so that they know what they're playing with. They know the machines and the architectures that they're going to be interacting with. Those less lectures, those lessons in operating systems and the others, they tend to be theory heavy, textbooks, lectures, um, and it's when they get to the cybersecurity realm that it's more experiential. Just because you already know what an IP address is, now let me show you how you can find somebody in a network by, looking for that IP address, or you can fool somebody by masking or spoofing your IP address, those kind of things.
I thought it was interesting too. You and I had spoken earlier about the level where where you are in academia. I mean, in your academic career, I should say. Are you a freshman or a senior? First year, third year, whatever. And how I know that the cyber range, at least the U.S. cyber range and the Virginia cyber ranges, are meant to kind of help with those freshmen and incoming sophomores really kind of get a good foundational education. But you had said, right, but it's also good for my seniors and their capstone projects when they come back in and they've only had theory for a couple years to really get them back into that mindset.
Oh, exactly. I mean, and you're tailoring the lesson delivery to the students. So if I've got freshmen and I want to talk about, all right, we're now going to map a network. Let me tell you what a subnet is. Let me tell you what an IP address is. Let me give you the basics or refresh your knowledge of the basics. And then we're going to go fire up Wireshark and we're going to actually try it. Um, as opposed to the seniors, where I might just say, go review your notes. Now we're going to get back into IP discovery or network exploration. Or I might add in complexities like subnetworks, wireless networks, networks that don't run TCP/IP. And so you can do those things at the senior level because they have had the theory before. You can't always assume that in a freshman or sophomore level class.
Yeah, and I thought it was funny too when you mentioned, you can say in the beginning of your senior year, for your students, hey, review your notes. And you're like, and they may or maybe likely won't even read the chapter, but if they're in the range because they actually have to do the thing.
Right. Well, exactly. And I don't mind if the senior shows up and is, in the lab and he's got a stack of reference books next to him. That's fine. But the point being that teaching seniors, they're more responsible for their own learning than at the freshman sophomore level, where I've really got to break it down for them and explain this is why these three pieces go together. And here's why that's important.
And I think just in talking to you and some other folks throughout the series of the podcast, there's a lot of flexibility with the range when you're talking about a 4-year institution or a 2-year, and that there's a lot of use cases to help optimize, if you will, and that's such a corporate sounding word, but that's what's coming to my mind, your theory. Or it's going to also help with getting certifications in workforce development and a community college level. It sounds like it really serves in both areas, however someone wants to utilize it.
Exactly. Exactly. You can use the same range, the same scenarios for education and for training. And again, that gets back to my comment about what is the purpose of the range? What are you trying to do with it? Um, when I taught at a community college, the focus was getting people to pass the entry level certification so that they could work for companies that had federal contracts and required that certification. For students at a four-year college like Virginia Tech, I'm looking more to educate them at the next higher level so that they can go and become, junior engineers and actually build these systems, specify configuration settings, and look at managing larger infrastructure enterprises, where the community college student, when they first get out of my class, they're looking for the, entry level system analyst kind of job.
I would think no matter where you come from, your education, from the employer's standpoint, if they need a certification, they need you to have the certification. They don't care if you came from 4 year or 2 year, you need to have it.
Oh no, and that's exactly, and there's always a debate over the need for certification training, and I tell folks, well, the argument is moot because the federal government requires it. Yes, you're right. If you want to go work for, a company that does not have a federal contract, well, then no, you don't need a certification. I think it helps. I think it helps differentiate you on the resumes, uh, establish a baseline, for the company that you want to join to know what your skills are. Okay. But it is a contractual requirement if you want to go do fun things with the federal government, especially the Department of Defense. So
I
there you
would love
go.
to kind of flip that narrative. And instead of talking about, hey, from the educator standpoint, flip it to from the employer standpoint that the educators, we hope, are helping these students become like, hey, what at the end of the day, what we need to do is graduate confident students who are ready to take on a career. Otherwise, we may have failed them. Yes, they need to learn and need to know theory, but we need to make sure that that theory as well as the hands-on learning all together put them as a contributing member of society at the end of the day. And there's a huge hiring gap right now in the cybersecurity space.
There is, and it continues. It's been something that we've been talking about, working on for pushing 15 years now. Um, and a big problem is, the hiring managers, the HR folks in some of these companies don't understand the certifications they ask for, so they ask for the wrong ones. Uh, it's also certifications are not cheap. And so when I was working in Michigan, we encouraged employers as part of the hiring package to offer certification exams as part of that, onboarding process. So in other words, student comes out of whatever educational institution, company ABC says, all right, you've got all the background. Now let me pay for you to sit for this exam. And I'll give you 6 months to review everything. And at the end of 6 months, you need to have passed this test. And there we go. Um,
You
yeah.
know, getting this into the hands of students obviously has to go through, I shouldn't say obviously, but the way we work it is, the US Cyber Range is not sold, so to speak, directly to a student. It goes through a professor or a department chair who makes that decision. Um, Talk about the ease of use for the actual implementer. If you're if you're an instructor looking or a professor and you're like, yeah, I actually am interested, but hey, I'm supposed to be in charge of this class. And I don't want to look like a fool because sometimes these 18, 19, 20-year-olds know more than we do because they're digitally native from the day they were born. They know all the things. How easy is it to use? Can you kind of just log on and do the thing?
So you can. My practice is if I'm going to teach this class, I'm going to do all the labs. I- I'm going to sit down, fire up the range. I want to know not only that I'm confident that I can explain the lab, but I also want to know if there are any wrinkles. Oh, when you log in, you've got to make sure that this is selected, otherwise, blah, blah, blah. But for, as far as running the class, I would recommend, you've got your regular class meeting, you talk to them, you might get them started on the lab so that you can answer questions, make sure everybody's in the lab, things are working well, and then it's homework. Go do the lab. Some schools had lab periods, but every place I've taught, it was basically I could get them started. Then because the range was remotely accessible, they went off and did it themselves. Um, there are certain places that have physical lab-like cyber ranges, but they are very tightly focused, and I don't believe that there are many of them left because they're just very expensive to maintain.
As we kind of wrap up our conversation, we've had a lot of different things that we've talked about. I would love just for you to share, even if it's just best resources, best practice. You understand cyber ranges from the Michigan one you founded. You were an integral part in helping with the Virginia Cyber Range and now the US Cyber Range. They both are up and running. Um, any thoughts that you would give to an educator who's listening and thinking, really want to do this, but, and whatever their pain point is or whatever their hesitation might be, and how you implemented it successfully and or the why behind implementing it.
Well, to start with, if there's a school, a state, an educator that sits back and says, "Oh, well, that sounds like fun. I'll just build my own cyber range," don't. Cyber ranges are more than a collection of equipment. They're the content. And so you've really got to have a good grasp on what am I trying to achieve? How long do I have to build this content? And then how am I going to maintain it? In 9 times out of 10, folks have gone out, built a cyber range, and then found themselves a couple months down the road just unable to keep up with the equipment maintenance, the curriculum maintenance, curriculum or remote access, all that stuff. And that's why I think the US Cyber Range has done such a fantastic job. It is accessible. Uh, it is affordable, and it does allow users input into the kinds and formats of curriculum that are being taught. Um, the other thing is the people writing the curriculum aren't, some technical writer off the street. They're also educators. So they have a very deep understanding of how to put a lesson together, how to make sure the lesson follows the objectives, and how to do the assessment at the end. So it all comes together, and it's there packaged and waiting for somebody who wants to take advantage of a range.
And I love when you're like, hey, if you want to do this, don't after you've done it now twice.
Well, and that's why I'm telling you, I have the scars, and if you're the kind of person who just likes giving up your spring break and your Christmas holiday and whatever, so that you can run cable underneath the floor and swap out a switch or three, well, okay, you're a masochist, but go for it. Um, or you just like sitting around all summer, writing, building, and debugging your own labs, you
Yeah.
know, good. I don't recommend it. Um, it is something that I think the US cyber range is there, and you're just choosing to make your own life harder by not at least investigating it.
Yeah.
Um, you know, when I was working with the other states, there would often be a lot of state pride. We have to have our own cyber range, and in fact, the Michigan cyber range actually white labeled itself for a couple states. Um, but that's because those states found out very quickly that building, maintaining a cyber range is hard.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, and you're right. I mean, not that we'll go down that path, but yes, the U.S. Cyber Range, same as you know, white labeled, for others, and it's been a wild success. And yes, why give up your spring break? Why give up all the things? And really, why put funding into something that's already out there? Use that funding to optimize and to extend beyond that, not build the same thing.
Exactly. 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 I think it's very critical that the U.S. Cyber Range has hit all the right notes. It's accessible from anywhere. It has a broad, deep uh, library of curriculum, and it has a staff that can help you if you have questions, if you need things, or something goes on. They'll work with you. So there you go.
They're they're an amazing team. And Joe, you are amazing for taking time to share all of your knowledge. I really appreciate you talking to us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Absolutely. And again, for all of you listening, we've been talking with Joe Adams. He is with the Electrical and Computer Engineering Department here at Virginia Tech. And thank you for listening and joining us for Next Gen Cyber, the Future of Cybersecurity, a podcast of the U.S. Cyber Range.